Hello, everybody. This is the Marty O'Donnell Show. This week is going to be very special because I finally have the person who we've alluded to in several of the other interviews. When I talked to Hardy and Jamie and Chris Carney and Alex Soropian, Max Hoberman's name comes up all the time because he was one of the original Bungies back in Chicago. He is responsible for the community. He was responsible for the seventh column. He was responsible for the Marty Army. He's responsible for Halo 2 multiplayer and the entire user experience of Halo multiplayer that has been so successful. So without further ado, let's just go right in. And here is Max Hoberman. Okay, here we are. This is the Marty O'Donnell Show. And here is my good friend, Max Hoberman. Max, how you doing? It's been a long time, buddy.
I feel like I've talked to you on the phone a few times, but haven't been on video in a while.
So. No, it's been a while, video or in person. I think I saw you at a PAX, that
was a long time ago. That was
10 years ago or something. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy how time flies when you're having fun. Well, it makes sense that I have Max Hoberman on the show today because we've already talked to Chris Carney and Hardy LaBelle, and we've talked all about Halo multiplayer. But this right here, ladies and gentlemen, Max Hoberman is the reason that Halo 2 multiplayer and Halo multiplayer in itself helped the Xbox to survive, because without the Halo multiplayer, I don't think Xbox or Halo would have survived. And I no matter, other than the music, of course, I think the music has a lot to do with it. Of course. No, Max, having Chris Carney on, and we talked about you, and then having Hardy LaBelle on, we talked about you, and it's just like, okay, well, we got to have Max on because he's the guy. So I thought I'd start back because this is all, reminiscing the what we call the good old days, which is interesting right now because Bungie's been around a long time. Bungie has gone through a lot of different changes. I'm not sure at this very moment when this show airs exactly how everything is going with Bungie, but I do know that there was a period of time at Bungie that starts back in the 90s. And you go all the way back to the 90s, which I think is pretty amazing. So give the folks a little, I think I probably met you the very first time I went to Bungie.
Wait, good, Marty.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to propose, if you do, I watched a couple of your episodes.
Yeah.
I saw your very humble description of how you came about the name for your show. I just want to say, if you're ever looking for an alternate name, The Good Old Days, there you go. This show might as well be called The Good Old Days.
The Good Old Days. Yeah, I've had a couple of shows that are not about the good old days, so that wouldn't fit. But most of the time, we are talking about the ancient of days, the oldest days, more than a quarter century ago. So you were out there in Texas. Now, you knew Charlie, right?
Yeah.
So how did that relationship start, and who came to Bungie first?
So, all right, let's see. Going back to the 90s. So I grew up here in Austin. That's where I am now.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to work in games. I went to UT Austin. There was no game programs of any sort at the time. There was really nothing. There was actually just one 3D art program at UT, and you had to be like a fourth year art major to get into it. So that was a dead end. So I ended up getting a degree in photojournalism, of all random things, but really wanted to work in video games. And eventually I applied for a job that got posted at Bungie called graphic designer / webmaster. That was the job title.
Oh.
Got interviewed for that. They Soropian, I've told that story before, but
sure.
Fun call how Alex Soropian called me up, and my one of my roommates picked up the phone, and all sorts of fun there. But eventually they flew me up to Chicago. Doug Zartman actually picked me up at the airport.
First time I met. Okay.
Drove me down to their office down on South Halsted Street, which was where you and I met for the very first time later on. And eventually, offered me a job on the spot before I had to go catch my flight home.
And this is like what, 96, 97?
97. Yeah, this was in 97.
Okay.
This was a couple months. This was like October 97, so a few months before Myth the Fallen Lord shipped.
Right.
So yeah, I got hired. I moved up there. I packed everything I owned into my car. I moved up there a week later, and I had so much work to do. I didn't have any time to find an apartment. So I literally slept at the office on a cot for like 2 weeks.
That's why the office was the way it was. Well, you know what? Now that you say this, I think it's possible I was already working with Bungie, because I met the guys, I think in late 96, and then started working.
Yeah.
Of course, we had the year of 97 to work on Myth of Fallen Lords.
So you asked about Charlie. So for everyone else watching who doesn't know who Charlie is, although you should have him on your show at some point.
I should. I absolutely should.
There'll be a lot of like bleeping and not allowed stuff. It'll be fine. Right. So Charlie's a friend of mine that we go all the way back to middle school. He ended up getting hired at Bungie. He ended up becoming the lead engineer on multiple Halo games, ended up running the engineering department, being one of the, I don't know what you guys called them after I left, the elderly, not as old as Marty's or something.
No, the Grizzled Ancients. Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's right. Oh, right. That was our team name during Pentathlon days.
Yes, exactly.
Ancients. We weren't as grizzled then, but yes.
Think about calling yourself grizzled when you were like 32 or whatever.
Yeah. It's all relative, right?
Yes.
It was all... so anyway, so I got hired up there. I was sleeping in the office, working my butt off. And I remember I became friends. I was friends with Alex pretty much from the get-go, and I became friends with Jason Jones after I found a stupid bug in the PC version of Myth. He invited me out to lunch. We became good friends. And I remember hearing your name, Marty, like here and there, right? Because it's, Marty this, Marty that, the audio guy. But it was probably like a month or two before you and I actually met. And it goes back to Charlie, why I remember this.
Okay.
And I know I've told you this before. You probably thought I was just being a jerk, but it's a true story.
Okay.
So the very first time I heard Marty, I'd actually never met anyone named Marty, with one exception prior to that, right? So I just heard Marty. I didn't think much of it. And I kept hearing Marty this, Marty that. And the only Marty that I knew was actually from college. And it was, my friend Charlie. It was actually his girlfriend went by Marty.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, well, that's true.
So
it
I had it in my head that Marty was a woman's name.
Yes.
And the first time I met you, I was shocked because I was a woman. What the hell? What is going on here?
Well, I probably had the hair at the time for that. So.
You had the hair, but yeah, that's right. So that was the first time you and I met, I think, just in passing. But then going back to Charlie, it's kind of a fun story. So I remember like we were Bungie was so small then. There were like 13 people in the office.
I know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, the San Jose studio just started up. There were so few people. Now, do you remember the other kind of lead programmer, Ryan Martell? Do you remember him?
I know the name, but I can't picture him in my head. But I know he was there. Yeah.
Yeah. Him and Jason, I think they went back to school together in Dallas or something. And it was really the two of them on programming. And I think Jason Regier was also there, who went on to be the tech director, at Blizzard, working on Diablo and whatnot. But after Myth shipped, I don't know if you remember, but Martell, he left. He left to go sailing or something and never came back. And Bungie was really starved for programmers. And I remember mentioning to Jason that, hey, I got a friend who's a programmer and he's a really smart guy. He's still in college. Yeah. And I remember Jason just blew me off. Like, yeah. It's funny because, So he blew me off, whatever. But I kept mentioning it, kind of dropping hints here and there. Hey, I got a friend. He's really sharp. And I was talking to Charlie about what are you doing in 97 for that holiday, right? Christmas break, whatever, New Year's. And he had no plans. And I was like, why don't you just come up to Chicago? Come hang out with me, right? So he's like, okay, yeah, sure. So he came up to Chicago and I set up a chair right at my desk. And I basically play test Myth all day, right? Yeah. Come up here for a few days, play test Myth. But it turned out I'd been talking him up so much to Jason that one day I'm sitting there, Charlie's just playing Myth next to me, and Jason walks up to him, says, hey, you, come with me. And he ended up giving him the programmer test. And he ranked it.
Oh.
He did really well, and they offered him a job on the spot. Said, like, quit college. You don't need a degree, just like Jason, I guess, and come join us. And that was how Charlie got his foot in the door.
Oh, and since then, Charlie has gone back to school. Did he finish?
Got his degree. He finally got a degree.
He got his degree. Okay, yeah, I thought that was
All these
really
years.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, so just to add to that story, I remember years and years later, I was talking with Jason Jones. For those who don't know who Jason is, one of the co-founders of Bungie. I was talking with him, and I remember him telling me, I was talking about Charlie, and I remember him telling me, he's like, yeah, when you were telling me about your, you got a friend who's really smart. You also were telling me you had a girlfriend back in Texas. Like, I thought you were full of shit. I thought you were just like this young braggart who's picking up all these people, right? And I was like, what? Are you kidding? Of course, Charlie, obviously I wasn't, nor my girlfriend, who's now my wife. Right?
Oh,
So,
wow. Well, you guys have been married for a long time then, right? Like, when
yeah,
did you get married?
got
That
married-
was when we were in Redmond, right?
yeah, 2001. So
Okay.
shortly after we moved out there, we got married after dating for like 7-8 years, and been married ever since. So,
Oh, wow, that's
how long you been
tremendous.
married? How long you been married, Marty? A
Oh,
little bit longer.
I've been married 47 years.
That's awesome.
So that
Very
means, yeah. So I, it's funny. For some reason in my head, I thought both you and Charlie were at Bungie when I first visited there, but apparently not. It was, Regier and Martel, Jason Jones, Alex. Oh, what's his name? Eric Klein. Eric Klein.
He was out in San Jose.
Yeah, he would come visit every once in a while. I remember that.
Yeah. There was others there. Matt Sell was there.
Oh, was
Tunser
Matt
Denise
Sell already
was
there? Okay.
Doug Zartman was there. Who else was there? There were others on the Rob McLeese on the art side.
Sure.
Mark Bernal. They both interviewed me. I remember Bernal was there. Frank, what was Frank's name? Another artist. Was it Pusateri, or maybe I'm remembering wrong? There were a couple artists. It was Diane. You remember Diane?
Oh, yeah, Diane. Sure, of course. Yeah. She ran the place.
when I got interviewed, at the end of my interview, the entirety of Bungie basically went and got burritos across the street at La Cocina, and then everyone sat on the floor in the lobby eating burritos together, which I thought was freaking awesome. Except for the burritos were not awesome.
Well, yeah, being from Austin, you would know good burritos.
Sure.
I'm sure South Side of Chicago didn't have great burritos. Well, so you were doing graphic design and like web design and handling the web stuff and the community stuff?
Well, so when I got hired, like right out the gate, there was just a ton of work, right? Like I had to, that's why I stayed at the office, because I had no time. I had to finish the box, right, to get it to the printer, do all the ancillary marketing materials, promo materials. Pretty much right out the gate, I redid the Bungie website. I redid the BungieNet website. I had my hands full. I had a lot of work, and I kept doing that stuff for a while. The community stuff was just something that I picked up because it was kind of weird. Like Bungie launched their first online game in Myth the Fallen Lords, and they launched this BungieNet service kind of modeled after BattleNet, I imagined. I never asked anyone about it. They launched this amazing game that was probably my favorite game of all time, especially the multiplayer, right? Playing Myth the Fallen Lords online. And it was really my first online communal experience also. And then they just abandoned it, right? Like off to make the next game, off to work on Myth 2, working on Halo. Yeah. And nobody paid any attention. And I was basically I was staying at the office every night playing Myth anyway. So eventually I just organized some community volunteer admins and whatnot. And because I was doing a lot of the website stuff, it just made sense to sort of do the community management, if you will. But I was just doing it because I cared about the community, I guess.
Yeah. And that's sort of, I'm trying to think, in like 97, 98, the idea of a game developer or a publisher having a community manager, that wasn't really a thing, was it? You sort of,
at all. Well, so there wasn't a thing, but Bungie was a trailblazer in that, I won't reveal any identities, but by the time I got there, they already had I got hired to be a webmaster.
Yes.
They had
I know who the webmaster is. Yes.
A webmaster who was a freaking scientist genius. And I remember after I got there, the guy who wrote the letters to the webmaster and responded to them, I remember he came up to my desk one day, all like sort of hat in hand, all humble, and was like, "Well, I guess since you got hired, it says webmaster in your job title, you're going to be writing the letters now." Right? I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're amazing.
Yeah, you're the webmaster. Yeah.
Yeah, so, that was a very strange form of community management, but it kind of worked.
Yeah,
But
it totally worked.
All the fans who wrote dumb shit, but whatever.
Now, were all those webmaster letters the ones that were sent to the webmaster? With all those real, or were some of those made up?
100%. They were real. 100% real communication from people. Nothing was made up. It was.
Oh,
it
wow,
was,
that's tremendous. Okay.
it was
Yeah,
amazing.
it's funny because I remember we finished Myth of Fallen Lords, and then I said, "Hey, Alex, there's enough music here if we wanted to. We should like make a little soundtrack album and sell it, and we'll split the profits." And he goes, "Okay, yeah, we'll do the printing and the make the CDs, and you do the music part and give us we'll make the thing." And he said, "But let me see if there's any desire for it." He says, "We'll do some product testing." And I thought, okay, well, that's going to take a few weeks. I was in the advertising business, so I thought it was going to take weeks to do testing, or whatever that meant, and user interest or whatever. And he called me back later that afternoon. He goes, "Yeah, we should do it." I'm like, "Well, I thought you were going to do testing." And he goes, "Oh, I did." I said, "What did you do?" He says, "Well, I put it out to the community. Like, did they want a soundtrack album?" And everybody said yes. And I thought, "Oh, I like this. I like the way this is. It's like instant, feedback. And, you say something to the community and everybody's,
awesome.
Gives you their feedback. You know exactly where you stand all the time."
The good and the bad and the ugly.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. I remember that soundtrack. I did the package design for it.
Oh,
right?
did you? Oh gosh.
Yeah, the first one.
That's right. Of course you did, because, in my head, Lorraine did all of those, but she wasn't there yet. Yeah, that was later.
I hired Lorraine as a graphic designer to essentially replace me in, I think, '99.
Okay.
So yeah, for a little while I was doing all that stuff. So yeah, I did the first soundtrack. I used to have to figure out. You remember Alex's silly early arbitrary product codes?
Yeah.
Like shorthand for some silly saying, or getting revenge on some journalist who did bad by us or whatever. I had to figure out the product code, and I think it was always like the 11th hour. I had to "What's a product code, Alex?" He's like, yeah, whatever. And I think the product code on the very first soundtrack was a dumb poem that I had written. If you go back and look, you probably have it somewhere. It probably says YYMMDBATC. I'll let you figure out what that means.
And I have no idea what that is. Roses are red. No, why?
Alex is great. The sort of sense of humor and the irreverent.
Yeah.
I watched your interview with him, and it brought back a lot of fond memories from those early Chicago days. Well, at the time, like, Alex was my boss. He put my desk right in front of his office, so he's over my shoulder staring at me all day long. But it just showed he and I were really close. And at the time, Laura was going to vet school, so he was basically a bachelor. Right. So we just hang out. We would just hang out all the time. Almost every night, we'd go out to dinner, watch movies, play games, whatever. It was a lovely time, and Alex made an incredible impression on me.
Oh, yeah, and we called him the man because he was in charge of everything. Right. But what was he? He was still in his 20s. You guys were all you were what, 22 or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was 22 when I got hired. So.
Oh, wow.
A very mature
22. Yes. Well, it's funny. I've seen lists of the product codes from Bungie over the years, and I know some of them because later on we started doing them, and some of them were ones that I made up. Yeah. But those early ones, I don't think I know what they are. So we should pool our knowledge and make sure we have a little repository of.
I think the internet now knows. I think the internet now knows what they
I think there's some that they still don't have. We should figure that out. We should find out which ones they don't know, and never tell them.
Yeah.
Well, so then you were. So when you heard that Bungie had a job opening, was it because was there some part about Bungie that you already knew? Had you already played Marathon, or did you just see
Yeah,
a
yeah.
job opening?
I grew up with a Mac. Like my first computer
Okay,
was a Mac Plus back in the 80s, I guess.
sure.
And I was a total Mac guy. Never used a Windows machine, literally until after I got hired at Bungie.
Okay.
Never even touched a Windows machine. So very much a Mac guy. And as a Mac gamer, Bungie was the pinnacle
Yeah,
of gaming.
that was it.
Me and Charlie, we had five of us, five roommates all through college, and we wired our apartment back when you had to do it with coaxial cable and terminators and all that, buy your Ethernet card for your computer, and we basically did it primarily so we could play Marathon.
Sure.
Like our apartment was just a LAN party heaven. So I grew up playing Marathon, primarily, but other stuff too. Before Marathon, like everyone would bring their computers over when we were in high school, and we'd play Minotaur together.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, a pirated version, or maybe a shareware, something we played pirated. And I remember fessing up to Alex once that we had played a pirated version of his game. I felt guilty. But we'd also bought network codes to have more seats for Marathon from Alex via fax machine, right?
So, oh, really?
I felt that made up for the pirate ways of whatever we pirated.
Oh, wow. So you go all the way back to that.
So Bungie for me was like the very best games there were, especially because I was into multiplayer so much. And Minotaur was only a multiplayer game.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. So from the get-go, like I think Bungie's DNA, certainly from a Jason Jones perspective, the DNA of Bungie's games really goes back to multiplayer.
Yeah.
And I feel like I learned a lot about multiplayer from those sort of formative experiences, right? Which for me were all LAN party experiences.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because the importance of the LAN party, talking to, especially was talking to Hardy about having to cancel Oni multiplayer, which is, you remember at the time, I mean, you probably worked on web, marketing material that was talking about how great Oni multiplayer was going to be. And you probably played Oni multiplayer, right? Yeah, we all played it. It was actually a lot of fun. It could have been really good. It just wasn't going to work. Wasn't going to work over the internet. I mean, it was laggy, and it just didn't quite come up to snuff. They could have done it if they had the time and the budget for it, but it's just too bad it never happened. But the tragedy of seeing, Oni multiplayer get canceled, and apparently Hardy had to make the call on that. So during the Halo days, when, Alex and Jason said, "Hey, we're canceling Halo multiplayer," Hardy went nuts. Do you remember that? Is that the way you remember that happening?
What's weird is I wasn't really that close on Halo 1. I wasn't that close to the dev team.
Okay, yeah.
We were all like, after Microsoft moved us out there.
You were on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, they had us all sitting in like cubicle farms. Man, life was hard. I did not like it.
Yeah.
Before we moved to Millennium.
Right.
Even in Millennium later on, they still had, we were still separated. You were over there. You, Joe, and others were kind of over with me and the community team, but we were in a separate room. Yeah. So I don't, Halo 1, I don't, like most of what I remember is like going to E3 and showing off like, Blood Gulch and at the kiosks and things like that. But in terms of the actual development process, I mean, I guess technically I did the user interface design, but because it wasn't an online game, there was so little to design. And I hired Dave Canlin to do the sort of screen design, the implementation. And honestly, he did 95% of the work. So I was just kind of goofing off doing community stuff and making, these database driven websites. And I wasn't paying that much attention in Halo 1 days, to be honest.
Well, yeah, you guys had a lot to do. I mean, you and Matt Sell were handling all those community stuff. Did you hire Tom Giaconda too? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So you hired Lorraine and Tom and Peter Marks.
So I hired Lorraine to replace me. I hired Tom Giaconda to do we were still running, like doing our own website stuff and doing some really innovative things. We're still running Bungie Net on a Linux box within Microsoft, which is all kinds of adventures. So
Yeah, I
Stefan
bet.
Sinclair, he used to work for me. Peter Marks was interesting because what happened is Peter Marks was part of the community that played Myth online, right?
That's right, right. He was
And
with Jamie. He and Jamie Griesmer were friends,
so
and
when
Tyson, I think. Yeah,
Chicago, I knew there were a number of guys that were local to Chicago.
yeah.
And at one point, we needed to hire some testers, right? Like contract testers. So I actually put forward Jamie's. I heard you talking to Jamie, and I was confused by your story because I was like,
Well, no, trust me, my stories are confused. That's why I'm having you all on.
I didn't know you were talking to Jamie, but I actually recommended that, hey, there's these two guys, Peter Marks, Jamie Griesmer. Why don't we reach out to them and bring them in as testers? It must have been for Myth 2, or I don't remember what. Why don't we bring them in? So I kind of put their names forward, and we brought them in as QA testers, contract QA testers. And then Jamie eventually convinced Jason to hire him. Maybe you had a hand in that for development.
So I think probably Jamie was working it on multiple fronts. He must have been working you on one side, and then he was working me because he blackmailed me to get me to bring him to show him the recording studio. So he got to see the studio downtown. And then I brought him over, and he must have already been on a list from you, I guess.
Well, he wasn't, I mean, to his credit, he wasn't working it. It's just there was a finite number of people that I was acquaintances with online, played Myth online with them and knew them, and would sort of vouch for and recommend we bring in that were local. And then Peter ended up joining the community team eventually. So I don't think I hired him, but he ended up working for me.
Okay. Yeah, and I was thinking
Peter had a hand. The late Peter now, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but I don't know if you remember, Peter had quite a hand in. I need to go back and watch your Hardy episode because I haven't seen that one yet. But Peter had quite a hand in the maps for Halo 1, actually, while he was on the team.
I did talk to Hardy about that.
Good.
Okay. Because I knew that Peter worked on Hang 'em High and Chiron, whatever Chiron was. Yeah,
more than that. Eventually he went over to join the dev team, and I stopped paying attention again. Notice the trend here.
Well, that's funny because so you were doing you were doing the community facing stuff, and also you guys worked out the. Now you must have worked with Zach. Did you work with Zach Russell, who was a tester at he came from Microsoft, right?
Yeah. Zach and I are still friends. Zach's awesome.
Yeah. I love Zach, and he.
I hired some other people. Sorry, going back, Marty. Sorry to interrupt you. I was thinking back to finish that earlier thread. I was just so you remember Tyson Green?
Yeah, Tyson, sure.
So I brought Tyson in as a intern, and then he eventually got hired.
Right.
And then you were talking on another one of your shows about Lars. I hired Lars. I heard a bunch of what you now consider the old timers. And Butcher. I didn't hire Butcher directly, but have you ever heard that story about?
Well, yeah, because he wasn't. Now my version of it is that he was in some hotshot New Zealand clan that played Myth, and then he did some sort of 3D version of the maps, right? And he sent it in.
So what I knew about Butcher is he was running the Myth World Cup, I think, like this big tournament, like everything's super organized. I didn't actually know him. I just kind of knew of him. And then one day when we were still in Chicago, I got a phone call. I don't know how I got a phone call. This like pre-cell phone era. But I got a phone call from this guy calling me from New Zealand. And I told this story to Butcher a few years ago. I don't think he knew it previously. But I got a call from this guy. He's like, hey, so, my son, this is his dad. My son is Chris. You know him. He's in the community. He's a big fan, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, yeah, I know him. I know of him. How can I help you? And the guy goes, well, he's coming out there to interview with you guys. And I just wanted to ask that you treat him nicely. Seriously, it was his dad calling me. I didn't even know he was interviewing. I was just like, okay, I guess. And then later, Butcher he went straight out to California. He worked on Oni, and then he came to join the Halo team. And Butcher and I really were the sort of the core of the multiplayer online experience leads for Halo 2 later on.
Right. Okay. Because now, with this, one of the stories I think I've heard from Jamie over the years is that he knew who Butcher was because of that Myth tournament thing, the Myth World Cup or whatever, and he knew that Butcher had made this, on his own, made a 3D rendering of the Myth maps.
I'd be surprised.
Yeah, and so I think Jamie was behind the scenes saying, "Hey, we got to hire this guy," and he was so upset. Jamie was upset because on the way from New Zealand, he stopped by the Oni team, and then that was suddenly it. Suddenly, he was working for Oni. He was working for Bungie West, and Jamie was mad because he was like, "No, Butcher was supposed to come out here and work with us in Chicago."
Makes sense. But Butcher's great, and I think funny story going back to my friend Charlie. So Charlie's super smart guy, right? Yeah. Really good at math. He did all the original he did all the physics programming.
Chucky Physics, yep.
Yeah, Chucky Physics that's what it's called, Chucky Physics. Anyway, super smart guy. And I remember when I was working on, I was coming onto the team full-time development for Halo 2, and Charlie and I were still pretty close. I remember him telling me two things that Charlie said about Butcher. One, he said, "You're not going to like working with him." I was like, well, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, nobody likes working with him." I was like, or whatever. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, whatever." And Butcher and I worked amazingly well together. And I actually loved working with him. I mean, he had incredibly high standards.
Yes.
And
yes.
He held like me to an incredibly high standard, but I loved it. Like I think I needed someone like reviewing everything I did and criticizing it. And, we didn't always agree on the game design side of things, but I just loved having someone who was, willing to take the time to critique anything and everything that I did and give me that kind of feedback. So I actually loved working with Butcher. It was a really awesome experience, and he and I hit it off incredibly well.
Chris is actually one of those people who you can say, who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, because he actually is the smartest guy in the room.
That was the second thing, Charlie, who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. The second thing he said to me, he's like, "Yeah, don't tell." Essentially, he's smarter than I am, at least at engineering programming.
He was. But like, what's nice is because I was like music and audio. Chris and I always worked well together too, because he was never trying to tell me anything, So I was always asking him for help with like, "Hey, we need to get a particle system that's able to recognize, collisions, but randomly." And he was like, yeah, boom, 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 boom. He was able to do everything. Anything I ever asked him about, especially if one of the other engineers was blowing me off, I could go to Chris, and he was always right there. He solved all sorts of problems. He was amazing. But that was a fun team. It's interesting to me as I think back on the fact that I can't remember when the slogan came in of Bungie, "We make games we want to play." I don't know if they just sort of naturally evolved or when they came up, but it really was like everybody there, almost everybody at Bungie had played a Bungie game. Like you started off playing Minotaur, and then you're playing Marathon, and then you're helping to make Myth, and then you're helping to make Halo. We were always making a game and the next game that we wanted to see. It's like, it was never, we were never trying to figure out what the market was. Although there were times I think Alex was trying to figure out the market, but like for the most part, we were always just trying to figure out what's the next cool thing to make.
That was, I remember when I got to Bungie, like I was a huge fan of Myth before it even launched. And it was because I subscribed to it was Tuncer's, what was it called? He used to send out
Net Games.
Yeah. With
IMG,
like the latest, with all the latest like updates about upcoming games. And I remember when I saw Myth, when I was still in college, and I saw Myth, and it just blew my mind. And I was so sort of enamored with it. And then later when I got to Bungie, I remember they had a pizza box that was sort of enshrined, because it was basically the original design doc, if you will, for Myth. And it was two lists written on the inside of a pizza box, and the two lists were titled. It was basically RTS, like shit that rocks and shit that sucks about other RTS games. And that was it. And it was like, here's everything that's awesome, and here's everything that we could care less, and let's just focus on what's awesome. And it was amazing. And I mean that was like the seminal example of just make something that you want to play, make something that's fun for you. So
That's funny. The rocks and sucks things, that dipole way of judging was something that I learned pretty quickly when I got to Bungie. Is like people, they never, there was no gray areas. It was like, yeah, that sucks. No, that rocks. And like, so everything I had to do is to say, I had to wait for somebody to say it rocked, and then I knew I was okay.
I think that the mythology, even within Bungie,
Yeah.
created a lot of problems, though. And what I mean by that is that sounds really simplistic, right?
Yeah.
Let's just make a list, shit that rocks, shit that sucks, and off you go, make a great game. And
Right.
what I learned later on, especially being friends with Jason, Jason spent, I don't know why, but he spent an inordinate amount of time talking to me, I'd say with me, but mostly to me, about sort of game design and theories of fun and all these different things that he thought really deeply about. I think he was probably trying to impart some of his wisdom on me. I think maybe 10% of it stuck because at the time I wasn't in development, right? Like we were friends, but I wasn't even in development. And I think the vast majority of what he was saying was probably lost on me. But it was clear, like he thought really, really intensely and deeply about the player motivations and the sort of theories of fun and all these different things. So yeah, I think the mythology kind of caught up with others who tried to emulate him without really realizing how much really, really deep thinking went into sort of every decision. And you can start with a list of shit that rocks and shit that sucks, but you got to go further and you got to dissect it. You got to analyze it and you got to come up with your strategy and your theory, right? But that can be a initiating move. But I often felt like others at Bungie over all the years tried to emulate him by not they tried to emulate him by not being really intentional and really thoughtful, and it bit them in the butt time and time again because they didn't really understand how sort of deeply analytical he was. This is my own read on this.
I think you're right. I think that's true. It's easy to sort of do the shorthand version of all this stuff, but like I know that even like with Jamie Griesmer or with me and Jason, we'd sit and talk about stuff for really, really long amount of time, get really deep into the minutia. But there could be that like snap judgment on something, an initial idea that could just be, no, that's not going to work. Yes, let's go there. But then once you got into something that was going to work, then the details really started being important. And I feel like that original crew that took their lead from Jason Jones really did get into the depths of things for the most part.
The snap judgment comes from experience, right?
Right.
It comes from, some of it's just makeup. Some people are wired a certain way. A lot of it comes from experience though, right? Like I feel the same way now. Like I can very, very quickly, I have a pretty good sense of whether something's going to work or not, whether it's a dead end or not. And, you have to be really patient to bring other people along. But, a lot of times that initial instant response is actually accurate. It's the right response. Right. So that comes with a combination of the makeup of the person, their history, their background, and experience that all kind of layers into that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day because, we'll get into this in a minute, but I have a Discord channel, believe it or not. It's called The Marty Army. How about that?
Never heard that name before.
I blame you. You know that. I want you to tell the story because I want to know that I had that story right. But before you tell that story, I talking to some of the young people on the Marty Army channel, and a lot of them are like really interested in developing games and designing games. And the tools have never been better, with Unreal and Unity and all the tools that are out there and third-party tools. But the one thing I can't explain very well is like, you're not going to make Halo. You're not going. The first thing off the block is not going to be Halo. You got to. I mean, if you look at the legacy or the pedigree of Bungie, it goes back to Minotaur and Pathways and Marathon and Myth, and all these things lead up to it. And Hardy came from another place, and he worked on games at EA, and people had a pedigree of stuff, and they had been making things together. And then Halo was able to happen. It wasn't just, hey, let's get a bunch of creative people together and suddenly something magic's going to happen. Maybe it was lightning in a bottle to a certain extent, but it was also, there was a lot of experience that happened, even with Halo, even starting with Halo.
Yeah, 100%. When I started Certain Affinity, I remember telling everyone, I said, we're not going to be ready to make a game like Halo, right? A big original IP, a big hit, big budget AAA title until we're 10 years old. And my 10-year determination, I just figured, all right, Alex and Jason started at Bungie in 91. Halo came out
2001.
2001, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, it took them 10 years. And I know from experience, Bungie, when I joined in 97, could not have made Halo, right? No. Like a lot of certainly, yeah. So this experience, it sort of compounds. And I don't, Jason in particular is such a, he's so kind of low profile figure, right? Yeah. I don't think the world understands how incredibly central he is to the great success of Halo and its sort of predecessors, and how pivotal he is. I'm not saying he's the only one, but in my mind, he is his experience over all those years is the reason that Halo was the big success that it is, the primary reason in my mind.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm a designer, so of course I'll go back and give all the credit to the designers.
Well, it was fun because I did. Yeah. I did get to work. I worked with the designers on Myth, and then I worked with on Oni, and then I worked with the designers on Halo. And Jason at that point wasn't doing any single level design, but he was, without a doubt, he was the creative director. Halo was his baby, and we saw that developing while we were in Chicago, and it was such an interesting way to see it develop, because it was like this fun multiplayer experience, third person running around. The Warthog physics came up, and grenade physics and rocket launchers and all that stuff, and there was no until Marcus sort of jumped in, I don't remember caring that much about the world or the environment. Like, that wasn't the important thing. The important thing was just the fun of the multiplayer.
When you say Jason didn't design a level per se, the thing that I remember, he was very, very hands-on.
He designed the whole arc of all the levels. Yes.
Yeah, right. Not only that, but he was very hands-on in designing the core combat and controls. Right.
Oh yeah.
The sandbox, the user interface. How are we going to make aiming work with your thumbs, right, on the controller? Right? How are you going to make aiming work with your Xbox controller and your thumbs, and the auto aim systems and magnetism and all those sort of hidden genius features. I mean, he was in the weapon balance, all these things. Like, he was just so instrumental, and that's so much a foundation of a game is what's the tools that you're given, and what's the problem set that you face in terms of enemy design, situational, encounter design, et cetera, et cetera. So the skeleton that the levels were built on, in my mind, the majority, the most credit, maybe is the best way to say it, goes to Jason. But I
agree, and especially because, like, for example, I know Jamie was young and he was new, and Jason gave Jamie a lot of, here, take these tags, and this is what you need to make it do, right? And then Jamie would tweak, show it to Jason, and Jason would say, well, no, it needs to be more this. And so I know that those two guys actually worked super close together. And when Jamie talks about 30 seconds of fun, he's parroting what he learned from Jason. Jason is the one who told him that.
There's no doubt in my mind, and I don't want to take any credit away from Jamie. No. He really wasn't really there in the room as they were doing that stuff on Halo 1. Every once in a while, jump in a playtest, whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know firsthand, but what I can say is that when we got to Halo 2, when Jason was like, all right, I'm going to go help the other team. Phoenix team, take a vacation, fix my back, whatever.
Yeah.
And Jamie was now in charge of the sandbox, right? Jamie was absolutely leading the charge, and it did a fantastic job. I really enjoyed working with Jamie too, because the single player levels were trailing, as you recall, so much that multiplayer ended up being the test bed for hey, we got dual wielding. Hey, we got boarding. Hey, we've got rockets that track, whatever. We were literally the test bed for anything and everything that Jamie changes he was making, weapon balance obviously included, for the sandbox. And I thought he did a fantastic job, and I really enjoyed working with him on Halo 2. His approach was different than mine. Jamie was a little more black box. Like,
oh, sure. Yeah.
Very out in the open, everything out in the open. Like Jamie would send a survey, so to speak, and nobody could see the results except for Jamie. And he could decide what to do about it. BCC on email pissed me off, right? But he did a good job. He took that data and he did a good job with it. Meanwhile, I'm just like blast out to everyone, and everyone's comments were like literally included with an attribution of who said what in my design docs, right? Total opposite approach, but
sure,
not good or bad. We both got good results, I think.
Well, it's funny because I think it was Jay Wineland who when he heard that I was starting a company with Jamie, he goes, "You're starting a company with Jamie? I thought you hated Jamie."
He's a nice guy.
No, I love Jamie. He's the best. He's the greatest. And but Jamie and I had some of the biggest knockdown drag out fights over the years. I don't know why, but sometimes we just get into some giant argument about something.
Why. No, you do know why.
Why?
You said that when you interviewed him, you're like, it says here you were a triple major, whatever. And what was one of those things? Philosophy.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's why. 100% why. Don't ever argue with someone with a degree in philosophy.
Yeah, it was impossible. And he, the thing is that he enjoyed arguing, and I enjoy arguing, as you know, and but the thing that always cracked me up about Jamie is that usually he would argue, and then you'd say, "Yeah, he's right. Doggone it, he's right." So. But yeah,
I argued with him, so I can't say I experienced that.
You never argued with him, I'm sure. Yes. But so you were community manager mostly. So I want to back up just a little bit because we haven't touched on this, but I think you probably talked about it a little bit with Alex, and I didn't talk about it with Alex for some reason. But we were the Mac guys. Bungie was put in the Mac Game Hall of Fame permanently. And all of a sudden, E3 2000 comes along. We show Halo to the VIPs at the very first meeting, and they all turned out to be Microsoft people. And they made the offer to buy Microsoft to buy Bungie. And as soon as we went through that little period where we had to convince the team, where were you initially on that when you heard that Microsoft made the offer? What were you thinking?
I was a little bit conflicted, as like a diehard Mac fan or growing up with a Mac. It wasn't just being a fan of the Mac. It was, at the time, Microsoft was also the, evil empire, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a lot that, was scary in a sense about that. But I think that I knew enough. I didn't know all the details, but I knew enough about the sort of precariousness of the business that I kind of knew it was probably, I trusted Jason and Alex immensely. And I kind of knew that if they were saying this is the right thing to do, that it probably was the best thing to do.
Yeah.
Sort of, the best, worst option, if you will.
Yeah.
So I never put up a stink about it the way that some people did on a sort of moral grounds. I won't say the name, but I don't know if you remember, we had one
who didn't go.
Who quit outright because it was Microsoft.
I remember it. No, I do remember it. I actually took him out to lunch, and I wasn't able to convince him. Of course, I was sort of the outsider anyway. I was the old outsider guy. So,
but anyway, he wasn't the Mac side. It was actually the Linux side.
Yeah.
Right. Microsoft made a lot of enemies at the time, if you will. So I was kind of on the fence, and I had immense trust in Alex and Jason, and ultimately I got on board and went along with it. I think Microsoft did more damage themselves for me when they came out to visit to try to woo us. You remember that? You remember?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, it was actually nice people in hindsight. Like Stuart Mulder came out.
Stuart was there. I remember Stuart. Yeah, I don't think Ed Fries didn't come out on that trip, if I remember correctly.
Ed did come, and what was awkward about it was all that anybody wanted to talk about was Ed and make jokes about the color of his socks and all inane shit that we all just. It actually did them a huge disservice. They're trying to be friendly and try and be likable and talking about the boss. make him seem like a human being. Turns out he actually is a nice guy, but
Yeah, he was.
did
Ed was
everything
great.
wrong to convince us that, oh man, we're going to hate this. That was probably the time where I had like huge like misgivings, right? After
Yeah.
they came out to try and convince us, look, we're all nice people and we're all humans. I'm like, oh, red flags, red flags. This is going to be terrible.
Well, you know, for me, it was funny because at the time it happened, my studio had burned down, if you remember that.
Sure. I remember.
And so we had spent a year building like this new studio in a post-production facility.
We're right up the street from our
Yeah. Well,
office.
our studio was across the street. Bungie moved, I swear Alex moved to the building right across the street from us because that was such a cool part of town. And then Post Effects was just up the street from that. So we were all, you could throw a rock and hit all three of us at some point. So I felt a little bit, you know, I was working on Oni and Halo at the same time. Things just kept changing so much, and we put all of our effort into that 10-minute long theater demo in 2000 for E3. And so when I heard that Microsoft was making an offer to buy us, the thing I knew about Xbox was it was going to have real-time Dolby surround sound. So I was completely selfish. I'm like, we got to go there because I want to have that.
Sound Xbox.
I don't want to be on a PC. I want to be on one of these consoles for the home theater. It's going to be great.
And in a similar vein, the console itself actually really appealed to me.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is I was always really obsessed with accessibility and usability. Yeah. Right. That's how I ended up doing the UI work, because after Myth 1, I was like, oh, I can improve the UI for Myth 2 because there's some problems, right? And then just kind of went on, ended up doing it for Halo, but that's a little side gig. But it's because I was so passionate about usability and accessibility. Yeah. And I think the console just forced it, right? We're not using a mouse and keyboard with this giant array. Like it just forced the games and the interface to be sort of accessible to everyone, you know, or at least it gave the opportunity for that. And for that, like I loved the notion. I was very sold on the Xbox potential.
Well, yeah, and for me it was the idea. I mean, I already enjoyed Nintendo, and I saw what Sony was doing, of course, with the PlayStation, and I thought, you know, we're not going to hit, you know, you're not going to really hit the big time of entertainment unless you're in the same place that you're watching your movies. Like if you don't have to move from your couch, and you can go from watching, you know, a Star Trek movie, and then you're playing a Halo game in the same exact place. I thought, wow, this is going to be great. So I was really sold on the potential of moving into the living room and having that amount of accessibility. And then even the quality of video and audio was going to be the same as movies. I thought that would be really amazing.
There was there was another factor for me, which was sort of mitigating factor. Even though I grew up using a Mac, I think, you know, the Apple at the time, you know, in the kind of late 90s was going through some really, you know, sort of tough times and some, you know, wild swings and strategy and all these different
Gil Amelio and
And I think I was already aware of that and a little frustrated by it as a Mac user. And then once I got inside of Bungie, and I started spending a lot of time with Alex, because Alex would actually take me with him whenever he'd go on these trips. I think I went with him. We visited like 3D effects, making graphics cards at the time.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds right.
All these different things. I did all these things, and he and I would talk a lot. And I came to, it sort of slowly dawned on me that despite Bungie being so critical to the Mac for gaming, Apple just really didn't care and wanted to pretend like we're a serious work machine, maybe, I don't know, but they just gave no love to Bungie.
No. Yeah.
And even when Steve Jobs brought, you know, Jason on the stage and showed all this stuff, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is all fake because you guys have been treating us like crap for so long. It really rubbed me the wrong way. So I think I was already the beginning of the end of my, you know, sort of love affair, if you will, with Apple anyway.
I was hoping, you know, but
greener pastures.
Yeah, exactly. But you could tell that Mac, Steve had to save Apple from itself. It had gotten, you know, too many different weird products and clones and stuff, and he wanted games to come back to the Mac, but I could tell that like they really didn't have a plan to get games to come back to the Mac. And Microsoft had jumped in like with months later, within a few months of that whole thing, and said, we're not going to just have games stay on the PC. We're going to make something for your living room. And that was an amazing thing, I thought.
You want to know something really odd about that, Marty?
Yeah.
When we had to, once it was all decided and we needed to announce to our rabid Mac-based,
That's what I want to ask you about is how did you were the one on the front line of that?
Yeah, we're selling the company to Microsoft, right? I remember Alex and Jason came to me and Matt Sell, and they asked us to write their ghostwrite, essentially their letter to the fans, just explaining that we're selling the company to Microsoft. So me and Matt actually wrote the letter purportedly coming from the two of them. And they just stamped it and shipped it off. And there was the letter from Alex and Jason.
Well, that's kind of good because you could write what you thought you needed to write, but then you didn't have to take the heat for it. So
well, I still took some heat, right? I was the primary point of communication, but it wasn't that bad. I think in the grand scheme of things, it all worked out, and a lot of people became maybe Xbox fans, certainly Halo fans.
Yeah, I agree.
That DNA of Bungie games was still there in Halo, and then once we went online later with Halo 2 at that, I know people felt that DNA of the online sort of communal experience that the Myth games had sort of pioneered.
Yeah. Well, it was good that we were able to keep everybody together and keep everybody. I think we made it clear to Ed when we got out to Redmond that what had happened to FASA cannot happen to Bungie. So you have to hermetically seal Bungie. Let us be our own company, even though we weren't. Let us, have our own keys and our own locks, and nobody can come over unless we invite them.
Metaphorically, yeah, but in reality, it was far more complex. Well, being part of the community team was also brand management, right? And we were having
you had to interface with marketing
and PR and all merchandising, you name it, and try and promote the Bungie brand. And nobody there really wanted it, right? Like it was a constant battle to get Bungie to be front and center. It was hard. Like those were challenging times. But we did a good job. But a lot of
this is the other like super forward thinking thing that you did, and that's why I asked you about Zach Russell before, because I think you might have worked with Zach a little bit on this. But did BungieNet and the seventh column, did that came out of your head, or that's from the community team? Where did that come from?
When I was working on BungieNet, it was still Halo 1 days, and it was really just a sort of a hub for the community, which the remnants.
It was before Halo shipped. It was you had started the design of BungieNet was communicating with the fans. You had the weekly letter and the webmaster update, whatever that was called.
That all went way back. The BungieNet went back to, the very first version predated me, like joining Bungie. That's why I had to fix it as soon as I got there. I had some issues, but that stuff was we just kept it going, right? We kept kind of perpetuating it. We were supporting the fans. They're having like fan fest events, and we'd show up.
Sure, yeah. Miguel
bring Xboxes with us and lots of swag and stuff. And we were just trying to do what we could to be supportive and make things seem like it's still, hey, look, it's still us. It's still the same. It's still the same people. And I think when it came to the website, so I ended up, when I moved full time a little after Halo 2 development started, I moved full time to development to end up doing the multiplayer online stuff. I basically had to backfill for the community manager role, and I hired Brian Gerard into that role. Who's still with, I think last I heard, still with now Halo Studios.
Halo Studios, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to, there was no way I could do the website stuff and the community management and all that and be focused on multiplayer development. So I kind of handed over the reins to Zach Russell and team of the BungieNet website. So all the integration with Halo that they did, like I can't take credit for any of that. That all happened after my tenure had ended, if you will. I was supportive of it. But
the seventh column, when it started at the same time Halo shipped, right?
Seventh column was just a silly name for our for like fan club or fan sites or something.
Right.
You mentioned the Marty Army, right?
Yes.
I might have been the ringleader, but I don't really get credit for that stuff, right? Because
I'm pretty sure that had to come out of Matt Sell's head. That's what I think. It's got to.
We had our community team, and at one point we had some. I don't know. Matt is more aware of music than I am.
Yeah.
And we decided that we were going to make up a fake Marty O'Donnell fan club because there wasn't one that we were aware of at the time. And Matt suggested that we mimic the Kiss Army, and that we'll make it like the Kiss Army, but it'll be the Marty Army. And that's how the silly name came about. And we just ran with it, and we just pretended like it was a real thing that really existed. And it was like manifest destiny, because apparently it is, and it does.
Well, what happened was, I remember you guys, like, of course, I was crunching on finishing Halo. You guys were crunching on that stuff. And at some point, you guys sort of unveiled the Seventh Column and these fan sites. And you were using the Marty Army as the, example of how this is going to work.
But it was all tongue in cheek. We made it
was all
up.
tongue in cheek. And I'm like, no, I'm taking that.
That's fine. Of course you would. We knew you would. By the way, you also talk about appropriation, Marty, master of appropriation.
Yes.
The Ivory Tower was our tongue-in-cheek name, because we're all sitting there all day out in our open office pit, and right over here is Marty in his office, clearly not working, just chatting with people.
You couldn't see in my office.
That was our impression. Right? That was the impression of what was happening in there. So we that's why we called your office kind of poking fun. We called it the Ivory Tower.
Okay.
And had fun with it. And then later when I needed a name for this like posh top of this like apartment complex or whatever,
yes.
I was like, oh, it's perfect. We'll call this map Ivory Tower. And the rest was history.
The rest was history. Yeah. And I think my gamer tag was Lance. It still is, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And I think either Carney or Cell or somebody, whoever wrote the little blurbs or description of the maps, it was something about,
Yeah. This was once a hangout for the famous socialite Lance O'Donnell, something along those lines.
Exactly. Yes.
I wrote all those little.
Did you write that? Oh, it's you. Okay.
We were just goofing off. We were having fun. I think that irreverence was just, at least my impression was, that's part of the charm of Bungie. So
yeah, I totally agree. And it's something that, like, no company can stay the same. Like the Bungie had its first stage, probably it was just Jason Alex in the dorm room, right? And then it had its sort of middle period, which was Chicago, or its early period was the Chicago era. And then I think that first, 10 years or so in Redmond was a maturing period. It still had the DNA from the old days. But I just don't know how you can continue that indefinitely. It's sort of just doesn't. So that's the way that goes.
10 years. Like I left at the end of 2006. I know. And the culture, if you will, had already changed.
It started changing pretty big.
Really significantly by the time I left. I always, no fault intended here, but I always imparted a lot of that cultural change to the combination of the success of Halo and some of the negative things that spawned, and Seropian departing. Because Seropian was such a custodian of the brand, of the attitude, not just the irreverence, but also the respect that the company had for its fan base. I always, like, Alex was so central to that it was kind of, when he left, I did my part to try and maintain that on the community side. But once I went full-time into development, probably 2002, 2003, like I couldn't do it all, right?
And
Alex left. Here's a fun tidbit for you, Marty.
Sure. Yeah.
When Alex announced that he was leaving, I actually went to Alex and Jason, and I wasn't entirely convinced, but I put forward the notion that maybe I should step into the studio head role. Because in my mind, I was just thinking about how impactful Alex was and how central he was to the sort of continuity of the culture that I loved. And I was like, okay, I feel like I've been training under him for all this time. Yeah. And I felt like I was well positioned to try and fight the good fight and maintain the culture. And you want to know what they said to me? They're like, yeah, you would hate it. Like having to deal with all that bullshit from Microsoft, like you would be miserable. Like, just like, yeah, we think you'd be good at it, but you would hate it. Don't do it. And I was kind of relieved because I think they were right. I think I would have hated it and I would have been miserable.
Yeah, it's funny because I was also thinking you're talking about Jason being sort of, reclusive, but in the first era of Bungie, he was much more accessible. He was never like super out front with everybody in the press, but he would do interviews and he would show up and he'd be on the videos. And it got harder and harder as more success, especially after Alex left. I felt like that's when Jason just sort of like took a step back from any sort of public viewing. Like nobody saw him anymore publicly. So I thought that was really too bad. I think he and Jason together, or Alex and Jason together, really made a great duo, and it was a
100%.
magic thing.
Yeah, and he was really good. He was really good at the press side. When I was in the room the very first E3 when we showed off before Mac, when we showed off.
Yeah, behind closed doors, right?
Yeah, it was Jason and Charlie sitting at the table, and I was the one who would like escort the press through that goofy, that spaceship booth that I designed. And
really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then I'd be basically fly on the wall, sitting there while they would do the demo and everything. I saw Jason in action, and he was really, really good at it. And I think when you're really competent and passionate about as a game designer, as a game developer, like it shows, and it makes a really, really strong impression. He was really exceptional at it.
Okay, so I can't let you go without clarifying. So you you didn't work on Halo 1 multiplayer. That was mostly the Hardy, and then a couple of the guys like Peter Marks helping to design maps. Chris Carney came in late to that process. That whole thing happened. Like, it's funny how people think it was 18 months or a year and a half or whatever. And I'm like, no. We didn't even move into the Millennium Building until January of 2001.
It was like 6 months, right?
Yeah, it was like that development period to finish Halo and to finish, especially the multiplayer, was really a short.
To start and finish multiplayer.
Start and finish.
Yeah.
So, the fact that it got shipped, the fact that it was all LAN party based, we got it out there by the skin of our teeth. And then you, obviously being on the community side, you were seeing the people and how they were responding, and you were seeing that this was giving Halo the legs that it had in terms of popularity. I think you and the community team were most closely attuned to that. And then when we started working on Halo 2, it was back to like, everybody's got their heads down. What's Halo 2 going to be? It's got to be this amazingly, graphically designed, absolutely brand new, crazy stencil shadowed thing. And the multiplayer has to go to the next level. It's got to be this warfare. I forget what we called it. Was it warfare? What did we call it?
Yeah. It was actually the plan for multiplayer back when we were in Chicago days. I remember doing the first playtest of it, and it was much more sort of fictionally immersive, right? Like, Marines versus the Covenant, etc., and then round based, switch sides and whatnot. And that was always the plan. And I think there were people on the team. I know Jamie is one of them, but I don't know who else, who were kind of bummed that they didn't get to do that in Halo 1, that the plan of record, there'd been no time, and they just had to, slap something more arena style multiplayer together quickly. So when they started on Halo 2, that was the plan of record. We're going to do the thing that we had planned for Halo 1. I use that word loosely because there weren't really not the type of planning I do anyway.
Well, I think you said in one interview, there was like a 2-page document or a 1-page document as far as it had gotten or something.
Well, paper map designs. Yeah. So there wasn't really much of a plan around it. But it was a very different experience. And I was just convinced. So I was just convinced that we're going to, like, we'd struck gold, right? With Halo 1, this amazing, so it was really the sort of spiritual successor to Marathon now on the console, but Absolutely. In this LAN party in this LAN party context, people were just loving it. It was amazing, right? And that we'd really struck gold, and it would be a huge mistake. I suspect this is where you're going.
Yeah,
It would
yeah,
be
yeah.
a mistake to not give people to not sort of build on that, to discard that. But it was worse than that. A lot of what they were doing, it required a broadband internet connection, and at the time, fast internet connections were not.
You weren't there yet. No.
Like we estimated by the time we shipped, broadband internet penetration was something like 40% of our audience, right? And so we're just going to leave all these people that loved Halo 1 multiplayer, we're just going to ignore them and leave them kind of, out in the cold, if you will. And I found that it wasn't treating people respectfully. It was a bridge too far, right? Like, we couldn't do that. I just thought it was a huge mistake, but it was a kind of a dick thing to do.
It was. And what I think is funny is I remember, because you were the, web guy, the community guy, the PR marketing, fan service, you were that guy. You weren't in charge of, you weren't on the dev side at all. So you took it upon yourself, which I will forever be eternally grateful to you for doing this, because you decided you had your own, like, you were going to campaign to convince the rest of the team that we were making a mistake by walking away from the party game and the rest of the community. And you just came in, you had documents.
You actually remember that? Because I don't, the only recollection I have is just the fact, probably because I've said it in interviews, right? Like,
sure.
I've told people, I remember being a pain in the ass and sort of ranting about how we were abandoning our community and we're making a mistake. But I don't actually remember any of that. It's just like a thing on a list. Like, yes,
sure.
I remember somehow I did that, but I have no recollection of actually doing it.
Well, I don't remember if you sort of just went around and talked to each of us individually, because you probably did. In conversations at lunch or wherever, you would talk about how this was important. And then I think you must have been talking to Tyson, and Tyson was so immersed in the warfare thing that I think he just couldn't get himself out of it. But you, at some point, you convinced, I don't know who it was. Did you convince Jason and Alex? Did you convince Jamie?
Not Jamie. It was just Alex and Jason, at least in my interaction. I think it was one of the last things Alex did before he left Bungie, actually.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember the details, but I remember they came to me one day and they said, hey, we've heard you and we've been thinking about it a lot. And actually, we agree with you. We think you're right. This would be a mistake, right? I was like, oh, thank goodness, right? And then they're like, and so we need to do something about it. We're still going to do warfare, right? The teams.
Yeah, that's right. It was going to be both of those things.
We're still going to do warfare, but we'd like you to basically figure out how to do something, for the LAN party people. They called it the party game. And we'd like you to
party game, right?
And we're going to give you one environment artist / level designer to help, and that's Chris Carney.
Right.
And go figure it out. Right. And apparently I was like, all right, let's do it.
So, but all that, so then you already had Dave Candlin on the team, right? So you designed, because I remember Unreal Tournament was the first game that came out on Xbox Live. And I remember thinking it just felt sort of clunky the way you got into games and the way you did things. And I saw you started designing the whole shell around the user experience for Halo 2, didn't you? How did that happen?
I did. I feel really bad because we thought originally that Halo 1 was going to be online, right?
Okay.
And we didn't find out till later, kind of midway through development, that Xbox Live wasn't going to launch in time.
Ship, right.
So I feel bad because you think I would have used all that time to get my plans in order, but really I didn't, because I'm a terrible, really good procrastinator. Right? I really didn't do anything. And then when we started Halo 2, I started thinking about the online ecosystem and what we wanted the experience to be before I even took over designing the multiplayer, right? Before Alex and Jason came to me. So right out the gate, we're like, okay, this go around, we're actually going to be online. And I started kind of ruminating on it and thinking about, and talking to others too, because I was very out in the open, collaborative. You probably remember some of that. And I started kind of laying my plans. And then maybe maybe a year later, Alex and Jason approached me to lead the party game multiplayer, but I was already well into conceptual planning for what I wanted the online experience to be, and I wasn't happy with what was out there, the initial games, and I wasn't happy with what was out there in the sort of the PC world, and I really wanted to do something that had just a much higher level of accessibility. So that was all.
How did the decision get made for technically for there not to be servers, but instead each box could be its own server? Do you remember when that technically got made? How did that happen?
Yeah, it was early days, and we did a little bit of analysis and thinking about dedicated servers versus client hosted.
Yeah,
and at the time we just this was me and Butcher mostly.
Okay.
Quick analysis at the time just showed it was going to be insanely expensive, right? Just absolutely crazy expensive to do dedicated servers, number one. But number two, we were planning a worldwide game, and it was going to be really challenging to have the sort of global coverage that we wanted with a sort of server farm dedicated server model. And very quickly, Butcher was confident that he could make it work and get us the level of security that we needed and the performance and everything with a, client, sort of peer hosted model. So I wasn't going to question him. It was just the obvious. It was just the obvious answer, honestly.
Okay.
At the time, at that moment in time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like having a data center would have been at that time would have been a data center full of Xboxes. That was our option.
Exactly. Right. So might as well use the Xboxes that are already out in the world, right? So how much did you work with Jay Allard, who was on the outside? He was from Microsoft, and it seemed like Xbox Live was kind of his his baby.
Not at all.
Oh, you didn't?
I never met him. No, what happened for Xbox
really?
Live?
Oh, interesting.
So after, at one point, kind of, I don't know, maybe 6-9 months into development, something, Jason came to me and Butcher, and we were kind of leading up our planning for this stuff, early days. And Jason's like, hey, we're gonna have our first meeting with the Xbox Live team, and I want you two to come join me, right? And I just want you to be a fly on the wall. You're not allowed to say anything. So we're like, okay, yeah, whatever. So we went and we were fly on the wall. We didn't say anything, and we watched Jason try and explain to the Xbox Live team what we needed, but he was totally uninvolved with what we were doing. Like, he actually didn't know the first thing about what we were planning, right?
Oh, wow.
And it was apparent to us that he was just kind of winging it, right? He hadn't really prepared. He hadn't talked with us in advance, and he was just kind of flying by the seat of his pants. Okay, whatever. Sometimes you got to do that. So then after that meeting, Butcher and I got together and we're like, all right, yeah, we actually need to be a bit more intentional in our approach to the Xbox Live team. There's no Jay Allard there, by the way, at the time.
Really? Okay.
It was a leadership team from Xbox Live with engineering and back-end server, data center management, all their different sort of development leads and PMs. But yeah, he wasn't there. And anyway, Butcher and I got together and we said, okay, really, we need to drive the relationship with the Live team. We kind of need Jason to go focus on single player. They're having a lot of problems. So we actually we're like, hey, Jason, you got a minute? And we pulled Jason aside and we're like, hey, so moving forward, we actually think we're going to deal with the Live team. We don't need you. He's like, really? He's like, yeah, we got this. Don't worry about it. That was it. He's like, all right, you got it. Not going to worry about it.
Wow.
That was it. And me and Butcher just 100% drove the relationship. And a lot of that was me driving the relationship because it was driven by feature needs, right?
Sure.
We need support for these features. And we're innovating in all these ways. And your feature roadmap that every executive who's got a hand in it has their own pet feature on your roadmap. Yeah, we don't care about that. 90% of that shit we don't care about. Here's what we need.
Well, what you ended up doing for sort of the user interface, the shell, the clans, the parties, the way people got together, the way they could talk to each other in the rooms, the switch teams, vote, all the different things that you did had never really been done exactly that way before, right? You put them all together in this one slick package.
We were trailblazing. It was fun. It was challenging, right? Because inventing and being the first, being the trailblazer is inherently challenging. Even just trying to explain what it is we're doing
Yeah.
was really challenging. I didn't even have the lingo for like party, and this isn't party as it exists on the Xbox today. This was within the game, this unit of people that stays together, follows the leader, all these things. Like it didn't even exist. We called them squads for the longest time, but I didn't like that because squads is what they were using in the warfare, right? For their subgroups.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
I didn't like squads. I had to come up with something else. I remember the moment there was like an epiphany when I came up with that terminology for it. But yeah, going back, parties was kind of what I think of as, in the Halo context anyway, there was a lot of invention, right? So there's a lot of things I'm really proud of that I quote unquote invented. Things like the spawn influencer system, right? The sort of heat for spawning, the way that matchmaking worked, all those things. But parties was really the one thing that I felt like was a true invention that I could have pulled, sprung fully formed, right, from whatever. And I remember the sort of the impetus for it was it was a realization that I had when I was thinking about the way that people play games online, and I was thinking about the way that you play games on the PC. You have to first decide where you want to go, what you want to play, because you're choosing a server, right?
Right.
And then you try and get together with your friends, and you hope your friends get into on the same server. You hope they're on the same team, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And what I had this moment of realization where I'm like, when you play in a LAN party setting, before you ever decide what you want to play, the first decision you make is who you want to play with.
Yes,
right?
That's true.
Get together the group, and then the group sticks together, and you sort of, what you choose to play is really a function of who you have, having a seat at the table and who's there playing. Right. And that inversion for me was really that sort of central, that really just upended the way that people, found games and got into games and played together, and was highly, highly innovative. Right.
It seems like some of that's gone away as things have advanced, right? They stopped doing those things. And I still like proximity voice. I know proximity chat has its problems, but I think I just feel like we need to.
I really pushed. I wanted proximity chat. I remember Butcher and I were aligned on it. And once Butcher and I were aligned on something, it's like there was no opposition. The opposition didn't matter. Like once he and I were lockstep, we got it.
I wanted to make sure that, like, when you were speaking and there was a wall in front of you, if there was a person on the other side of the wall, it sounded like you were speaking like this. Like, I wanted Prox voice to feel like it was happening in the environment. And once we got that all working, I was just thrilled. And it's just funny how little that carries on.
It was all just this extension of trying to virtualize the LAN party experience, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of my logic. It's like in a LAN party, the guy next to you might not be on your team, and when you kill him, you can kind of talk shit to him, right? And he can hear you floating and whatever else. So let's virtualize all these aspects of that experience. And he might be an asshole, and you might not invite him to your basement ever again.
Sure, you can put him. All right, kick him out of the house.
There was all this pressure in those early days for people. We're like, what about this problem? We need to put a solution in place. Anticipatory, is that a word? Anticipating this problem, right? Or this abuse. And a lot of times my response was, actually, we don't. Like, there's social mechanisms that can resolve that, and we'll do a few things here and there. But I used it. My sort of stock response was, we don't need to solve that problem, because players have, especially in a LAN party setting, they have what I call arm's length resolution mechanisms, right? So if the guy's being a jerk, punch him, right? Whatever.
Exactly.
So, metaphorically, nobody should actually punch anybody.
Yeah,
but
never punch.
So a lot of that is kind of the Wild West in a sense, that we weren't trying to protect people from other people being jerks. We're just, if you really don't want to play with strangers and you want to curate it, like, we have custom games, and you can go and you can be the party leader. You can be in charge. You can be as selective as you want. But when you're out in the wild and you're playing with strangers, like,
you got to expect it to be weird.
And it's going to be good experiences. There's going to be bad. We'll try and give you tools to manage the worst of them, and protect yourself. But at the end of the day, it's a grab bag of experiences.
Yeah. Well, so we've gotten up to to what I consider to be the end of the golden age period, the shipping of Halo 2. It's next time you come back, we'll talk about, the tumultuous period of moving to the new building and Halo
Yeah,
3
I thought you
and
were
getting
gonna.
out of Microsoft and all of that
Yeah, I thought
stuff.
you were going to want to chat about all those powwows we used to have at your house to
Oh yeah.
endlessly endlessly lament the situation and decide or not, never actually decide what the hell we wanted to, whether we wanted to leave Microsoft, bring everyone with us, go rogue, start a new studio. Man, yeah, there's a lot we haven't talked
That's a whole separate chapter. That's, it's not as interesting. It's more fun to talk about the cool stuff we made. So
about. I agree.
Max, thank you so much for being here. I don't want to go more than an hour and a half. We're right about that mark. And this was great. Thank you so much for being here and filling in, my stories, which are like Chris Carney and Hardy and Alex and Jamie. They all fill in parts of my stories that aren't right.
You have a
So
crazy memory. You have an incredibly good memory for this stuff, and I feel like I also have a good memory. You've heard me talk about these things
yeah,
before.
yeah.
So, like peer-to-peer respect here for your
There we
awesome.
go. Okay, very good.
I
All right.
appreciate it.
All right,
All right.
thanks, Max, and good luck. Obviously, Certain Affinity is doing spectacularly well. Good luck with your growing company and all the stuff you're doing. We'll talk again soon, okay?
All right, Marty, take
All
care.
right. See you, everybody.